Hello guys, hope you're doing really well out there as usual. We are back today with another very interesting topic, one that I haven't touched on for a long time. I've got a very special guest here who is going to, I guess, expose or tell her story of her experience in a particular segment of the New Age, which is extremely popular. Before we get into it, guys, if you're new here, please consider liking the video, subscribing, sharing. As you know, all that stuff really helps the channel out. So without further ado, let's get into it. So today I've got all the way from Tel Aviv is Jessica Eve. And Jessica has a story in which she was very much involved with a segment of the New Age called Advaita. Maybe I said that wrong, and the whole non-duality. So welcome, Jessica, to the channel. And yeah, how did you start with getting into what you got into? To start
Sure.
from the beginning.
Yeah. Well, I was living in San Francisco and I was going through a bit of a hard time. And I read Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, our good old friend Eckhart. And yeah, I mean, I basically got indoctrinated to see the ego as bad, as in the way of of being free from suffering and to spiritual awakening. But also, of course, there were benefits to being more present and having insights into things where we're hung up. But it was life-changing for me. I was giving the book to everyone. Now I want to burn it. um, and from there, it just kind of led me to more non-dual teachers. So a couple different guys. Well, also, I don't know if you know the book, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer.
I've heard of it. Can you just briefly explain what non-duality means in
Yeah,
the way that you
sure. Yeah,
just
let me start with that. So non-duality, I mean, it basically just means like non-separation, or not to, people think of it as oneness. But where it originates, the teachings that are non-dual now originate in are Eastern. And they originate from, there's different parts of Buddhism that are non-dual, and then Neo-Advaita, which Advaita Vedanta is a Hindu tradition. And so the Neo part is, that they're Eastern appropriations of a traditional Eastern path that's based on ego death and basically obliterating the personal sense of self and seeing the world as an illusion and not really real. And, once you really wake up to that, then you're enlightened and you're free from suffering. So it's a pretty radical path, of course. And that's really exploded in America over the last, I don't know, ever since, the hippie era. But in the last maybe 20 years or so, it's become so popular. And so when I started getting into it, I very quickly had this big sort of ego blowout experience and this
did
sense
you
of like,
destroy your ego?
well, something like that. Yeah. At least I thought I did, it's not actually possible or desirable at this point for me. But I had the big experience of this self-dissolution and, the laughter of, oh my God, I never existed. It was all a lie. It was all a story, like a fiction, a narrative in my head. And the world is an illusion, everything's an illusion. But the real experience of that was just kind of, walking down the street and all of a sudden it's like, boom, like I disappeared, but everything else is still there. And it's just like this radical feeling of liberation. So I started finding more teachers that were, helping point you towards experiencing that more and more. And yeah, the more I got into it, the more my sense of self was eroding. And it felt liberating, from mental suffering, and all of that. But it was also, I mean, it was really that whole kind of the there's no such thing as separation. Reality, the world of form, is ultimately not real. What you really are is pure consciousness, is really the big thing. What you really are is an amorphous, formless substance or non-substance. And yeah, the more I went down that path, the more I felt this kind of freedom. But the more I became obviously kind of cut off from the world. I experienced for about 2 years only mostly positive. But it gave me this kind of ability to like be here, but not really here, and detachment. And I started to become like more and more kind of withdrawn from, you know, the world around me and involvements, and that sense of detachment. And over time, it just really led to a loss of motivation in life, desire. You know, the whole thing was like the end of seeking was a big part of it. You know, just stop doing, stop pursuing. All the other part of the narrative is that all of your, it's really renunciation, like all of your desires, all of your preferences, your opinions, your judgments, your hopes and dreams, all of those are a barrier, right? A barrier to being free from suffering, and they're bad, obviously, is what they're meaning. So that was starting to happen. Like the less that you experience this sense of self and of reality, then a lot of the sort of passions fall away and your interests in life. But I still felt for a while that was a good thing. But I got to a point, I'm kind of just probably skipping a lot of things, but that's fine. I got to a point after a few years where I realized how like dissociating it became in depersonalizing. And I got to this point where I realized like, oh my God, like I can't really be fully in relationships. I was starting to like pretend to be my old self that didn't feel real anymore, to be called the false self. I was like upholding this sort of, you know, pretending to be the person that I used to be, but there really not being more of a real feeling sense of self there. There wasn't enough of a me to really engage as a person. And so it, you know, it kept real intimacy from happening. It made me feel like I'm not really there during intimacy. And it was over time, I started to realize that this was not a good thing, that I'd have to be, if I kept on this path, I'd really have to be sacrificing the richness of relationships. And yeah, and so it started to get kind of worse and worse, where I realized I couldn't meaningfully really participate in my friendships, and a lot of just kind of apathy, and again that loss of motivation. And at a certain point it switched into like the harrowing kind of depersonalization, where it was like very distraught, that feeling of like of not being real, but in a bad, not liberating way anymore. And that was completely like harrowing and dysfunctional. And then
how many years into this kind of rigid belief system were you in before it started to break down?
Probably 2.5 to 3 years.
Okay.
Yeah, it was more after the accumulated effect. You started to see what the negative consequences were, or what you were having to sacrifice for this kind of you know, ego, self-dissolved way of being. And then I went to a retreat with a man named Jeff Foster, who was one of the guys who really got me into this whole absence of self. And he was now saying like that was wrong. We really need to befriend ourselves, not abandon ourselves. And for me, that was such a shock. Like, oh my God, that actually resonates with me more. Like, this is tragic that I went on this path of, rejection of the self and self-abandonment. And that's when the whole thing just came crashing down. And it was like in an instant, I saw what it really was. The spiritual bypass, obviously, it's a huge spiritual bypass. And yeah, just how unhealthy it was. And even a lot of the messages of it are mirroring the messages that you grow up with if you have a narcissistic caregiver, which I had in my family. Your inner experience kind of invalidating your inner experience, and also you shouldn't have needs, your needs don't matter, your preferences don't matter. I mean, they were all the same, really. And so that was shocking too. And I had to go through this really profoundly difficult shift towards self-compassion, kind of like realizing that your wounds and your pain are like inner children, not a monster, not the pain body, the vicious, demon. And I was really stuck because I really had gone through a sort of death of a former self. So I was really stuck in this stage of, what do I do? Do I keep going deeper into this ego dissolution? Because those teachings basically say you can't turn back. You just have to go further. You're only distressed because you haven't fully dissolved the ego, and your ego is backlash and it's kicking and screaming. And that was very compelling, but it was like, I just realized it was this sort of like deal with the devil kind of thing. It's like, you sacrifice your soul and your individuality for this like boundless freedom, which was really real. And part of me wanted to continue on that way, but also seeing, right, the sacrifices. And I ultimately decided they were too big. So then I was kind of lost in this kind of like bardo state. And I realized I wanted or needed like a rebirth and a transformation. And so, so that started happening. And since then, you have to piece yourself back together or take back the parts that you don't want to leave behind. But also, form and discover a new authentic individual self. But a really, really, really difficult part was, how the fuck am I going to see reality is real again? I've seen so clearly that it's all an illusion, that if I try to take that back on, I'm going back to sleep and I'm going back into the matrix of the mind and all of that. And that was, oh my God, I can't do that. So I went through a process of realizing reality, because I also realized like my head has also been filled with all of these concepts, and what I realize now is like really this new programming and conditioning. And it's so convincing and so hard to get out of. But I started finding other philosophers who were kind of a different kind of non-duality, that were like, the world is real, but it's an expression of sort of a formless, or of, let's just say, like, of the universe. Like, it's a real expression. The self is real. It's something that's evolved as an expression of the universe, right? So I slowly started being able to feel that the world was real again. And since then, my kind of something that I'm very passionate about now is helping to raise awareness about these adverse effects, and help people understand, like, really understand what it is that you're getting into. Like, you're in pain, you're in suffering, and you're looking for like an instant way out of that. But you probably haven't really considered what the sacrifices are that you'd have to make. And yeah, so spreading awareness, but also supporting people. I discovered like it's really terrifying and heartbreaking. There are so many people in the world that have gone through the same experience that are suffering right now because of, you know, depersonalization, alienation, like for something that's supposed to be about non-separation and oneness, one of the biggest things is profound isolation and alienation because you can't relate to people anymore. You know, more like clinical depersonalization, there's a lot of suicide. Yeah, a lot of dysfunction, a lot of people who were parents and found that they really lost the ability to like feel empathy for their kids and their partners. Just really awful things. I mean, it makes sense. It's like you're trying to be renunciate in a, they say like a householder's life, or people that couldn't continue their studies because they lost all motivation, or they lost their job because they couldn't function in it. And just, you know, a deep nihilism and apathy. But it's also very crazy making and total mind fuck, a lot of the ideology. And so I had an interview recently on Buddha at the gas pump, if you're familiar with it.
Yes.
And I told this story, and I've been getting, it was in August, I've gotten over 100 emails from people that are expressing all of this. And, you know, I don't know what to do. Like, I've considered suicide. I don't know, like, help me, please help me feel real again. You know, I lost my partner. I went through a year of the most painful isolation, et cetera, et cetera. But so I've started to form support groups for people who are, I say, recovering from this, and wanting to move on from it. And yeah, so that's been what I've kind of been dedicated to in the last 6 months, is trying to do that. And just, I mean, just the sheer volume of people, the thing that, you know, I think is really relevant also to the talks that you do is the ways that those who promote these teachings and these ego death experiences have all of their different tactics for dismissing the ways that people are harmed. You didn't get it. They didn't get the teachings, right?
Yeah, they're not advanced enough. Their consciousness
Yeah.
isn't evolved enough. I hear it all the time in the comments of some of my videos of people that are still in the new age.
Yeah.
I mean, the same. I get so many emails every week that people struggling, like they were involved with not just the sectors that you're in, but other sectors of the new age.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons I do what I do, because if you blink, you miss it with this stuff, because it's so subtle. And, you know, they all come along with their soft voices and their white robes, and it all looks so good, and it feels good to people. And so they run with it. They take the baton and they run with it. And I think what was interesting right from the very start of what you were saying, and if you don't mind me pointing out, is that you initially started off saying that you had a lot of stuff happen in your childhood, and this kind of appealed to you. And it's a theme that you see time and time again with people, because the new age scene is like a moth to a light, you know, if you've got trauma, because from your perspective, it was almost like, great, I'm not me. I'll just put all of that over there, and
I'm the problem, of course.
Yeah, and so you disassociated yourself. You disassociated from your human spirit, from every aspect of self. And I guess in a way, I mean, you can describe it better, but you were almost lost for a couple of years in this kind of, like, I
lost myself completely.
Yeah,
I disappeared from my own life.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the thing about like what you're saying also, and this is the other part of what I'm passionate about, is really like an urgent call to action for this community of people to see that to see that the demographic is people who are emotionally vulnerable. They're people in extreme pain, in crises. Those are the people that are looking for instant escape. But you get those dismissal tactics that are like, oh, well, the people that are harmed were unstable. And it's like, but who do you think is drawn to these teachings? And if those people in that deep pain and, let's say, maybe even instability were not coming to these teachings, the teachers would have no audience.
Yeah.
So they're targeting that audience, whether or not you want to call it exploitation, and whether or not it's conscious or unconscious, it really is that. And so like the lack of accountability on teachers' parts to, the problem is that they're giving out these teachings and messages just totally indiscriminately. And that's what makes it different from the traditions that had preparation stages. They didn't say the same thing to everyone, but they're taught as a blanket solution, as a panacea, without any type of like screening or assessment of the person or any type of preparation, and no way to support the people that it's like, I thought the other day, I'm like, can you imagine inducing a loss of identity in thousands of people that you know nothing about?
Yeah, right.
It's just unbelievable. And you can't support them when they go through challenges, but they also, again, like you said, they dismiss it. They didn't get it. They didn't have the real experience. And some people didn't, and they just got caught up in this horrifying ideology that fucked with their heads. But like myself and tons of people, they have the real experience, and it's not surprising that's going to lead to challenges.
Absolutely. And one of the bottom lines in all of this, which is what I point out a lot to in my videos, is who does this benefit? Who does this benefit when you have thousands and thousands of people that have some level of awareness about them, and you funnel them into a ideology where they're just nothingness? Don't worry about what's going on in the world. You just, you're just consciousness. This is just this is just an illusion. Don't worry about it. Don't attach to any of it. Don't worry about the outcomes on anything. Who does that benefit? It benefits the people that want to control and take away our rights and freedom, because all of a sudden you've knocked out a whole demographic of people that could be active, that could do real work and work towards real change in the world. And that's where it's so clever, and that's where it's so subtle, and that's why they do it. And I always tell the story. People might have heard this before, of when I lived in London. There was this young guy who I met on a march. I went out on a protest one day. I can't remember what it was for. And this guy was like 19 years old, and he had fire in his belly. I was like, wow, that kid is gonna go far, right? He had all the passion in the world, and I was waiting to see him being like the next big thing. Anyway, I lost contact with him for about 3 or 4 months, and I saw him again in Hyde Park, and I went up to him, and he had an Eckhart Tolle book in his hand, right? Different person. I am not joking you. All that spark had been knocked out of him. He was all this like airy fairy, wafty, like just completely
emptied.
Yeah, and this is before I was even aware to the levels of what I'm aware now with all this stuff. I was like, that stuff cannot be good for you. and so yeah, it's so dangerous. It's like a silent weapon, isn't it?
It really is. And the other thing, when you said who does it benefit, is it's an enlightenment in general. Like it's about personal salvation, right? It's not, doesn't have like a social conscience. It's not about how could it benefit other people or society. I mean, in some types of Buddhism it does, but in general you're seeking it's like a selfless, self-centered path. So eventually you might realize, like, what's really the benefit of this besides my own escape? But I wanted to ask you a question, is you said who's it benefiting, and you were talking about how, you know, they're getting us to be indoctrinated and lose our like critical thinking skills, but it's hard to believe that all of these people are ill-intentioned. But is that, it seems like you're kind of pointing to that.
When you say all the people, who
Sorry,
do you...
all the teachers of...
Oh no, I don't say that all teachers are ill-intentioned. No, I don't at all. I think some of them actually do have good intentions. It's just what they've done. Like someone that goes to university and studies pharmaceuticals, they've just read a book. Like they might get into it because they want to help people heal, but they've read all these government indoctrination books, and they come out just repeating what the government wants. And
I see.
the same thing's happening with I would say a large section of these new age gurus, where they've read all these Eckhart Tolle books and all these non-duality, and then they go and then they start something themselves, and because there's a big demand for it, they get really popular. And so I don't for 1 minute think that everyone has a dark agenda. I definitely know that for sure there'll be certain people that are implanted,
There are
like
some.
Eckhart Tolle, probably Muji, who we were talking about off air, and maybe a few others. Who's the other one that's big out there that was pushing the needle? Oh God, I forget his name. If it comes to me, I'll remember it. But yeah, so there's definitely an element of that for sure, where people are just being misled and they're just repeating the teachings.
Yeah. And you also get into, you know, once you become that level of guru, it's very difficult to not become very narcissistic. And, you know, and a lot of them have become millionaires, of course, as well.
That's the one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He's a big one.
Yeah, he's definitely in the big club. But yeah, I mean, when I was doing my Muji research, and it was all coming out about him a few years ago, about what he was doing with women and stuff like that. I was watching undercover videos of like people kissing his feet and stuff like this.
Yes, they do.
I mean, the indoctrination, it just goes to show how strong these cults are.
Yeah, yeah. And people don't realize that they're in that. And the other thing is I've realized that some of the really big, well-known non-dual teachers, I really get the sense that there's a sense of like missionary in a way. There's really a fundamentalism to it, and it seems as though they have this vision of what's good for society, and they want everyone to take that on and to spread that. And so there is a motivation behind that of, you know, really kind of like you want everyone to take on, you know, your way. And this whole, also like that global vision of like Eckhart Tolle as the new earth, that the next stage of evolution is no ego. It's like there would be no survival of the species when people feel they don't exist and they have no motivation. And but yeah, so you do get into that.
I mean, I've always thought it's boring. Like that was the main thing that put me off. I was like, what? No ego? I mean, without ego, there'd be no creation, no music, no art, no meaning to things. Like part of the greatness of humans in their more expanded state anyway is our ability to create. You know, that's what we are by nature, creative beings. And they want to try and knock that out of us by knocking out the ego. And I always thought, what, to think that nothing matters, and you know, all this, I'd be bored. Like that's not a cult for me. I don't do cults, but that definitely would be a cult for me anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just touching on the ego, of course, and I say this in my videos, you know, to be stuck in ego is one thing, and obviously that's not beneficial to the person or society. But it is important to have a healthy ego and to set boundaries and yeah, to participate in life. And I like the word physical matter. I mean, that kind of tells you that it matters, you know, this physical experience matters. And I think in spiritual communities, quote unquote, they put more more focus on like the spirit side and
Yes.
everything like that, when really the physical side is just as important, maybe if not a little bit more important right now, because we're actually incarnated in physical bodies.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. So it's really good to hear what you're doing now. How's that going with, you must, like you say, you're getting a lot of support, and have you got your own YouTube channel with all of this?
I do. I haven't done too much with it yet, but I'm hoping to start doing more soon.
Yes, yes. So when you're in like some of these retreats and you were having this like waking up from this false awakening, as I call it, you just saw other people just completely indoctrinated, or were other people starting to have doubts around you, or?
I think there were some, but I mean, this massive epiphany that I was having, people around me were like, really curious about what was going on. So I don't think so much.
Did you try talking to other people about it or raising
I
questions?
was starting to like share my story a little bit, but do you mean other people, like friends and stuff?
Other people that were involved with that way of thinking, that were kind
Oh,
of
not
like,
for a while.
no. Was
Not
that
for a
because
while.
you just hadn't figured it out yourself at that point, or you were just you were still like in that kind of culty mindset?
I think it was more of, there's some embarrassment around having kind of fallen into that. And I don't think I realized to what extent other people were experiencing it. But yeah, and it still felt like it was like my secret inner world of what was going on. And yeah, so I guess that was the main thing.
Yeah, yeah. Great. Well, it's been fascinating listening to your story. And I always say that people that come on here and speak up are incredibly brave, because, there can be backlash and people don't always like this information. And like you say, there is an element of, some people feel like, not stupid, maybe that's the wrong word, but a little bit deceived. And I always say to people, we've all been blinded by the false white light at some point or another. Everyone that watches this has at some level or another. So there's no shame involved. We're all learning. And so I really thank you for coming on today and speaking
Yeah.
your truth. And it's going to help a lot of other people, I'm sure. And I really hope that you continue to talk and make videos like this and help people out of this spell that they've been put under with these very dangerous New Age teachings.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
where can people find you if they?
Yeah. I was going to say that, it's also really hard to have this realization that, this path you've been on, that you've been so leaning on, for your way of coping with the world and your sense of reality, can be really hard. It's like, the same way it is coming out of a cult. So I do want to let people know, like, if anyone's listening to this and this is disillusioning for them, that they can connect with me and join a support group. I also am starting to do, I'll always offer like a one-off call to hear what you're going through and offer any guidance I can, or ongoing support. But my website is thegloriousbothand.com. I'm sure you'll put it in the
Yes.
description.
Yeah.
So you can contact me through my website or my email.
Okay. And your YouTube, we may see some more content soon.
It's coming.
Okay.
Coming.
Great, great. Well, thanks again. And it was lovely to meet you today.
Thank
And
you so much.
yeah, you
Thank
take
you.
care.